HR issues can kill you. One complaint against your company can turn your world upside down. And you spend way too much time dealing with HR when you should be spending your time on making a profit. You should talk to Bambi. With Bambi, get access to your own dedicated U.S.-based HR manager starting at just $99 per month. They get to know you and your business while providing HR expertise and the personal touch you need and want. They're available by phone, email, and real-time chat, so onboarding and terminations run smoothly. Team members reach peak performance, and your business stays compliant with changing HR regulations. And with Bambi's HR Autopilot, you'll automate important HR practices like setting policies, training, and feedback. HR managers can easily cost $80,000 a year, but Bambi starts at $99 per month. Schedule your free conversation today to see how much Bambi can take off your plate. Go to Bambi.com right now and type in Accelerate under podcast when you sign up. It'll really help the show. Spelled BAM, BEE.com. Bambi.com. Type in Accelerate. My guest today is Kevin Herring. Kevin is founder of Ascent Management Consulting and a recognized expert in team and business unit turnarounds. He's creator of the 90-Day Turnaround, a unique program for building great leaders and transforming any work group into a highly engaged, high-performing team in just 90 days. Kevin is a consultant, executive coach, published author, and keynote speaker. He's been published and quoted in Forbes, CFO, Talent Management, Workforce, and HR Executive, among others. Thanks so much for being here today, Kevin.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I am thrilled to have you here. There's been so much conversation around team building and, the Great Resignation and all of this, with productivity and whatnot, that I think this is a pretty timely topic that we're going to be exploring. So talk to me some about performance. Is it simply a matter of skill and will, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, there absolutely is a lot more to it than that. And I appreciate the question. In so many HR circles, we talk about employee performance in terms of just a question of skill versus will. Are they motivated? Do they have the skills? What is it that holds them back? And it tends to fall into one of those two categories. The reality is 80 to 85% of performance is determined by the system that people work in. They simply don't have a lot of control over what occurs in the work world. And what happens is people come to work. And you think about it, if you have a new job, you're going to go work for a new employer, you're excited about the opportunity, you almost always have expectations that this opportunity is going to be better than the last one. You expect that your boss is going to support you. You expect that you're going to have resources and the wherewithal to bring your expertise to bear on problems and the work, and be able to create and engage at high levels. And just you expect a great experience, or certainly a better one than you had before. But what happens? Those expectations, one by one, end up not being met. People find that they don't have the support from the boss they expected to have, or maybe the resources they need to do the job just really aren't available, or they just don't have control over them. Somebody else has control and they can't access them. They can't access the data or the people they need to meet with, or other resources, equipment, and so on. And little by little, they become demotivated. And that's what we find from researchers David Wetton and Kim Cameron, that demotivation is a learned response. And usually within the first year of a person's time in a company, they've pretty well determined how well that job is going to work out for them. And they're either highly engaged and highly motivated, or they're pretty much demotivated and sometimes even becoming cynical. So skill, yes, you have to have the skill to do the job. Will, there's a lot that goes into that, and most of it has to do with the system that's been created by the leadership.
I just think this is so valuable. I even wrote it down. Demotivation is a learned response. That's critically important for leaders to understand.
Absolutely is. Yes.
Wow. So what holds leaders back from turning around performance? Is it that they don't realize that they've created that environment? What is going on there?
Yeah, I would say two primary reasons. One is that what really holds leaders back is their stance about people and their awareness of that stance. And it's interesting that I've had quite a few opportunities to meet with leaders and ask them what their stance is about people. And I ask, what is it that you believe about people? Do you believe that they're generally dependable, self-motivated, that you can trust them and leave them to do the work and know that they'll get it done and that sort of thing? Or do you really believe that people are generally unmotivated, lazy, undependable? You need to watch them. You need to check up on them. You need to make sure they're doing the work. And you really can't trust them to take care of things when you're not around. Where do you fall on those two ends of the spectrum? And generally, it's about 50-50. There are about half who believe that people are generally motivated and trustworthy, and there are those who believe they're not motivated, they're not trustworthy. And what that drives is a change in leadership style, right? I mean, those who are high trust, low control leaders certainly have a better experience with their employees. And I've seen that consistently. They treat them differently. They engage with them differently. And they have a greater potential to create high performance from their team. Those who are high control, low trust leaders consistently get low performance because they don't give people the tools to be able to contribute at higher levels. They hold them back. And so stance is the absolutely first thing that people need to look at. Be aware of your stance. So a leader who has the right stance can really generate a lot more performance from a team. The other thing is then, if you are a low control, high trust leader, then what's the path forward? How do you more fully engage your team? And so there are a lot of good leaders out there who just simply don't know the path forward. And they've been fed a lot of bad information too about what motivates people and what generates higher performance.
Like what? I mean, can you give me some examples of what they're hearing that's wrong?
Well, it's funny because I'm actually working on an article on that right now. So,
oh, great.
Yeah. So I've identified 5 myths that are very common and very destructive to the performance of a team, to the engagement of a team. I mean, ultimately, what determines high performance is the level of engagement of the team. And what determines the level of engagement is, by and large, the work environment that people find themselves in, the system, the work system that's created by the leaders. And so what are some of the myths that cause people to make bad decisions in their leadership to create the system that holds people back? Well, one is that in every job description, pretty much every leadership job description is at the top of the list, a leader's job is to motivate people. Well, can people really be motivated by others, or do they need to motivate themselves? And what happens when a leader tries to motivate people? What does that do to the relationship? Well, if we're trying to motivate people, the only way we can do that is with extrinsic motivators. And extrinsic motivators do not create a high-performing team. It's intrinsic motivation that creates a high-performing team. And that is a personal thing. That's something that has to come from within the individual. So that's myth number 1. We have to counter that myth and instead say, leader's job is not to motivate people. A leader's job is to create the environment, to create the conditions that enable people to tap that inherent motivation that they bring to work with them before they start getting demotivated or learn to be demotivated, as we've come to understand. Another myth is that people need or want to be motivated. And I can tell you, I've had groups of people that I've asked this question and that I've asked, do they need someone to motivate them? And I can tell you, nobody's ever raised their hand. Do you want anybody to motivate you? Nobody raises their hands. Leaders obviously believe they do not need to be motivated, but they do believe everybody else does. I can tell you, though, when I get a room full of people, frontline employees, and I ask them, do you really need somebody to motivate you? The answer is no, I don't need anybody, and I don't want anyone trying to motivate me. Why? Because motivation is trying to motivate people extrinsically is manipulative, and nobody wants to be the object of manipulation. All it does is breed cynicism. So there are a couple of myths that we need to dispel. I'd say a third one is trying to motivate people is an effective leadership practice, and we know because it's manipulating, it's not effective. It's not a way to build a high performing team. So here are a couple others I want to point out.
Right.
The best way, so I'm sure you've heard this, the best way to build a high performing team is to clarify expectations and hold people accountable.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Wait, what?
Right. I mean, that's every time there's a problem, what happens? HR sits down with the leaders and says, look, you need to clarify expectations. You need to hold people accountable. That's the knee-jerk response to every team problem. And we know that's silly. First of all, there's a question is it even possible to hold people accountable? I think that's another myth. That's another myth. And what happens when you try to hold people accountable? Well, first of all, holding people accountable is really about pressuring them.
Yeah.
It's really about micromanaging, checking up on them, making sure that they're doing the things you want them to do. And what do you get from that? You get compliance at best. People want to keep their jobs. They'll comply with what they need to do to keep their jobs, but they're not passionate. They're not engaging at the highest levels. They're not personally committed to the success of the business or to the team. That's not what's happening. And so it's not effective. But the other thing is, can you really hold people accountable? Because once you start telling people, I'm going to make sure you get the job done, what have you done? You've just removed responsibility from the other person and you've taken it on yourself. You now have taken on the accountability. So you're accountable and the other person knows they're not. They know you're accountable and you're just going to pressure them into doing what you want them to do. They get that and they will comply if they want to keep the job. But you won't get a high performing team by any stretch. I've never seen it happen.
That's so great. It's so true. God, I mean, you're talking about that and I'm thinking about leader, quote, I'm using air quotes, leaders who I've known who are absolutely engaging in those behaviors and then wondering why it's not working.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Exactly. There's a better path forward. And if we're going to unlock higher productivity, we've got to use the keys of engagement. We know that Gallup has done a great job of helping us to understand that a little bit better. There are a lot of surveys out there about employee engagement. And you look at the Gallup survey, it gives us the highest level of employee engagement of any of the surveys I've seen. And it's like 30%, or 33% or something. It's terrible. Yeah. So no matter how you look at it, disengagement is the norm. The vast majority of employees don't go to work passionate, excited to be there, committed to the success of the whole. I mean, you don't have that experience, and it's because they're not having an experience that engages them. So leaders, if they want to correct that, leaders have to change the way they're managing. They have to be aware of their stance. If their stance is high control, low trust, they need to change that stance, or at least take a leap of faith and try something different. But the path forward is to create the conditions that enable people to choose accountability. It's not holding people more accountable. It's creating the path that enables them to choose accountability.
So can you talk about the 6 C's of engagement and in relationship to improving productivity?
Absolutely. Right. So we've worked for many, many years with clients, helping them to build high-performing teams, to turn around low-performing teams. And we've kind of boiled it down to a few things that we find really make the difference. Now, sometimes teams can be very effective with some of those, not all of them, but we find if we have all in place, we have great results. We get great success. So those 6 C's of engagement are context, connection, control, commitment, communication, and competence. So context and connection are really about awareness of why we come to work, what the point of it all is, why we matter, and how we connect with everything around us at work. So think of context as the big picture. Something like understanding the business, the marketplace that we're in, and why we're in the marketplace, what customers want and expect from us, and how we stack up against the competition, and what it takes to succeed, what we have to do internally to be successful in the marketplace. And I like to liken it to a football team, and or any sports team for that matter. But think about a football team that has a division that they compete in, and they know the standings, they know who all the other players are. And I worked for a company years ago, a Magma Copper company, that had a total transformation, went from being on the verge of extinction to becoming a Wall Street darling. It was just a great experience working with them. And one of the things they did is brought everybody into a one-day course at finance they created, where they talked about who the other mining companies were, who the other copper companies were, and recognized that Magma Copper was a mid-tier company. It was not in the top tier of the biggest companies. It was in a mid-tier, but it had some strategic advantages. It actually was able to refine copper to a higher level. So when they sold rod for wiring and things like that, they had a competitive advantage. They could command a premium price for that product. And a lot of things that employees just weren't aware of until they understood that. Worked with a pump company, a large industrial pump company that had people that created parts in different facilities who didn't know what the final product was. Never understood it till we brought people together and educated them, and suddenly the light bulbs went on. Oh, you mean we're building a pump? Had no idea. It's important for people to have context to understand what's at stake every time they get on the field, so to speak, and play a game. And we do a lousy job of that in most companies. So having the big picture, understanding what we need to accomplish when we come to work, what's important for us to do and why it's important. And then connection is how I, as an individual, connect with that bigger picture, with that context. So what is it that I need to do? How do I need to interface with my colleagues, my team members? And how does my team need to interact with other teams? That connection is critical for us to be able to work together and break down those silos and things that get in the way. So context and connection go hand in hand. If I'm a football player and we're in the middle of a game, I've got to know that what I do matters, and I need to know the game plan. I need to understand that when there's a broken play, there's a ball bouncing around the field, that I don't just sit and wait or sit and pray that somebody will pick up the ball. I'm a business person. I'm a team player. So I know that if I have an opportunity to act, I will act, either pick up the ball, jump on it, run with it, block somebody. I'll do something to help advance our team's success. I'm not going to just stand idly by and hope somebody else does what needs to be done. That's what we need to have happen in our teams. And that happens when we have greater context and greater connection. So those are 2 good places to start. I think you have control is when you let people have the access to the resources they need. They have the freedom to decide how to do the work and how to manage it effectively. We give people greater commitment or opportunities to personally commit and choose accountability when we give them the control and we give them the context and connection. That's hard to do. It's hard to choose to be accountable for something that you have no control over, right? And yet we put employees in that situation every day. And we want greater accountability. We want greater commitment from them. That's just not going to happen unless we create the conditions that enable that. And the other things are supportive of that. We have the communications, knowing what's important, what the metrics are, key metrics are that we need to pay attention to. How do we know that we're competing well in the marketplace, that we're succeeding as a team and as an organization or as a business unit? Those key metrics, those communications are essential. And then competence, we talk about two things. And one is having the broader knowledge and skill set to be able to support the team's success, but also having the ability to manage and to work as a team effectively. So how do I integrate the managing and the doing of the work so that the team is more self-reliant and not dependent on the leader to communicate all that needs to be done, how it needs to be done, all that sort of thing. The team needs to have the capability of doing that and operating successfully as a team. The leader is supposed to be creating the game plan and working with the team to be able to execute. So those are the 6 C's, essentially the things that if we have them in place and we manage those well, teams are more engaged, employees are more engaged and committed, and we tend to generate extremely high performance, far more than we thought we could get, because we're doing things considerably differently.
Boy, no kidding. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, and that's how you get to real accountability and real ownership, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It's like we say, this is what we want, but then we go at it in a way that doesn't get us what we want.
Exactly. Yeah. We fight against ourselves. That's one of the challenges I think we have is, starting in business school, people take an organizational behavior class and they love it because it's a lot of fun. And they learn a lot of these principles, but then they go to all the other classes that seem to contradict what they've been taught there. And they get into the real world and there just doesn't seem to be a lot of support for it because people don't understand it and they don't know how to apply it. So even when we have the right information, we don't always know how to apply it effectively in our teams. And we have to be able to challenge things. If we have, if we're trying to give people access to and control of the resources they need to perform at a high level, but we have an accounting system that demands 3 and 4 levels of sign-offs for every little thing, then we've got to understand that we have a problem. The system is demotivating people. It's holding people back. Right. So it's a whole systems approach. We've got to look at the whole thing and what's getting in the way, not just what the immediate leader is doing.
Are you in transportation and logistics? Well, this podcast is for you. Every week, Truck and Hustle takes you on a journey to learn the ins and outs of the trillion-dollar transportation industry. Hear from real people and business owners just like you who are crushing it in their own transportation niches. We pull back the curtain, peek under the hood, and help you find out where the opportunities are so that you can take advantage and build your own million-dollar transportation empire. This is insider information that you can't find on Google. So if you're ready, let's take your transportation business to the next level. Join me, Ramel Watley, every Tuesday for a new and exciting episode of Truck and Hustle.
Welcome, change agents, to your go-to place for stories that ignite your spirit, fuel your purpose, and connect us all. We believe in the incredible power of the human spirit, its boundless resilience, and the inspiration it brings to our lives. On the Driving Change podcast, we'll journey together through the extraordinary yet very relatable experiences of some of the most amazing people on earth. Our mission? That through these stories, we might just spark change within you and awaken a newfound motivation to harness your unique gifts to make a real difference in the world. So get ready to be inspired and join us on this incredible adventure. You can find the Driving Change podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you love listening to your favorite podcasts.
So I think that is so key. And when you were talking about information, a question popped into my head about what information should a leader share with their team members? Is it everything? Is it need to know? What are your thoughts on that?
Great question. And typically need to know is kind of the determinant for sharing information, right? It's, we share things on a need to know basis.
Yeah.
Here's the way I look at it. When you look at most organizations, they're structured fairly hierarchically. Even though we try to work more in teams, we still are pretty hierarchical in most organizations. And what that means is that those at the top of the organization pyramid have access to all the information, or most of the information. They don't necessarily have the information of what's going on at the front lines, but they have the bigger picture for sure. They understand the big picture. They tend to understand context reasonably well. They have a lot of information about the business, the marketplace, what needs to be done, and what the customers are saying or needing. And they take that information and they share it to lesser and lesser degrees as we move down through the hierarchy. So ultimately, what happens? Well, those at the front lines of the organization, those that are doing the core work, that are interfacing directly with the customers, have the least amount of information and the least authority to make decisions.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a horrible situation, absolutely horrible. They should have the most information. They should be fully equipped to deal with customer needs, customer problems, or changes and challenges in the core work. They should be able to deal with them immediately. So we have to change that. So the notion is, how do we equip people with all the information? And so I'd go back to it. Let's forget the need to know thing. Let's say we're going to give employees all the information we can possibly give them. Obviously, there are some things that are confidential that we can't share. Get that. But those things are few and far between. Leaders need to be sharing everything. Their job is to transfer their expertise and knowledge to the team. And they can't do that if they're holding back constantly. They've got to be willing to open up, share everything, educate the employees, build their capacity to contribute at a higher level by having greater knowledge and understanding, both broadly and deeply, about the organization, the customer, the needs, and the things that they need to do to help the business succeed.
I'm so glad that you said that. And do you think that if you don't give people all of that information, they're going to fill the holes themselves, and they're probably going to fill it with inaccurate information?
Boy, what an insightful statement. Yeah, question. Yeah, absolutely. We're interesting creatures. We just seem to need to know or understand something. And we think about organizations that have a lot of rumors. Well, that's because they don't have a lot of information that gets shared. And people want to understand, and they'll take whatever information they can get and they'll piece it together the best they can, and they'll fill in those gaps to make sense of things, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that'll lead them to erroneous conclusions. They'll have the wrong information, bad rumors get spread. All those things happen simply because we're not sharing information openly enough. We're not transparent enough. And organizations that want people to have deep understanding, deep levels of commitment, need to let go of holding back. They need to be transparent. They need to be open and share information. They need to be willing to have the tough conversations with employees. I had an example. I worked with an organization one time where they had a CEO who was going to give a all employee speech or all company speech, and they were cynical about it. I mean, I couldn't believe the level of cynicism from people. And I said, "What is it about this speech that people are cynical about?" And they said, "Well, a number of years ago, this is a while back, it may have been 8 or 10 years ago. It was some time ago. So the people who have been around a while remembered it. And they said, we had a rough year. And at the end of the fiscal year, our CEO held a meeting like this, all employees, and said, we've had a rough year. It's been difficult. Everybody knows that. But boy, the future is bright. Next year is we're launching new products. We've got customers lined up. We've got a lot of great things happening. It's going to be a great year. And we all have a lot to look forward to. And on the following Friday, so that was on a Monday, The following Friday, they laid off a third of the workforce. All right. Now, if there's no way that CEO did not know they were going to lay off a third of the workforce a few days later, right? But I can tell you that was seared in the memory of the people who stayed in that organization, who were able to keep their jobs. They did not forget it, and they did not trust that CEO. And they commented openly that they said, you can't trust anything that comes out of his mouth. That's so damaging, right? That is so damaging in an organization. Transparency is key. And I'll contrast that with another organization that had been doing a lot of great things in the workplace, trying to create a more engaging environment for people and having great success with it. But the marketplace had hit them pretty hard. And they were forced with a difficult decision. They felt like they were going to have to let some people go. They're going to have to lay some people off for financial reasons, and they were despairing over that. And I said, well, are there other opportunities? Are there other ways to manage this? That's sort of the knee-jerk response is, let's cut people. And they said, well, we really don't want to do it, but we're not sure what else to do. And I said, well, what if you brought people together? What if you had a conversation? And so they opened up. They were transparent about it. They had union employees. They brought in union leaders, and they were open about it. They were transparent and said, here's the situation. They opened it all up, opened up the books, and said, this is the decision that we're faced with, and we don't want to lay people off, but we have to find a solution. Can you help us? And they did. They rallied together. They found ways to reduce costs, to improve productivity. They found other ways that they could finance the short term and keep them going until things turned around a little bit. And they were very successful with it. And I think the transparency is critical. And I had another organization. I worked with a finance group in a university, and we in a large group meeting with support teams, we talked about the fact that the university was going through a difficult time and they were having major budget cuts. And it was an eye-opener to most of the people in the room. They didn't know. And I said, why do people not know this more broadly in the organization? And a couple of people spoke up, and they were in leadership position. They said, well, we weren't sure everybody needed to know. We didn't want people to just quit. We didn't want to damage their morale. And I said, these are adults. These are not children. These are adults. How many of you appreciate knowing? And those who didn't know appreciate it. They said, yeah, we would like to have known, because otherwise we just go about our business doing things the way we've always done them, not knowing that we need to be more frugal. We need to be more cautious about our spending right now. And, we could delay some purchases, or maybe buy in smaller lots over the short term. We could do some things differently, but we can't do that if we don't know the situation.
Right.
And I think that's the critical thing. If we don't share the information, if we're not transparent, we treat people like children, they can't respond in a way that helps us through the challenges.
And then they end up being the ones who suffer the consequences.
They pay the price. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I had a similar situation with a company that had lost a huge client. And so for a period of time, until they had replaced that client work, it was a small manufacturing company. They needed to do something. And they brought me in to say, okay, we have these old timers who may not be as productive as the new people, but they have seniority and we're not really sure what to do. And I said the same thing you did. I said, sit down with them, tell them what's going on, and then ask them to come up with ideas and leave the room.
Yeah.
And let them talk about it. And they did. The staff came up with solutions. So no one had to lose their job. They all pitched in and they made it through. And I feel like they were a lot more committed to the success of the decision because they were part of making it.
Absolutely. Instead of having something done to them, they had the opportunity to co-create the response.
Right.
Yeah. Big difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Big. And I feel like everything that you're talking about really comes back to trust, right? If the leaders trusted their people, they would share the information with them, which would help the people trust the leaders.
And they need to understand what trust means. So many people will say, well, I hired them, so obviously I trust them, or I wouldn't have hired them. Okay, well, that's the first step. But now what do you do after you hire them? A lot of people haven't really considered what it means in terms of my leadership practices. How do I show trust, and how do I enable people to trust me? How does that work? They don't really have a clear understanding of how to make that happen. And so they're doing things unknowingly that damage trust.
Right. All the time.
All the time.
Yeah. Boy, yeah. I love this information. I think this is so important for leaders all the time, but especially today, because, they need good, productive people to stay and help navigate, right?
Absolutely. There was a group that I worked with once that was just absolutely desperate for help. And in fact, they called me in desperation when I was traveling, working with other clients, and said, can you help? Can you be here tomorrow? Well, no, I can't be there tomorrow, right? I've got a week of other commitments outside of the area. But they had major quality problems. They had major productivity problems. They had a major customer threatening to leave, which would have devastated the business. And when I finally had an opportunity to meet with them, I sat down with the leader and I said, "Tell me about the organization and how people work, and what it's like to work here, and so on." And he told me that he was the only one who seemed to have any commitment to the business. He said he got up, he came in early every morning. He looked at the workplace. He made sure everything was in place for the day. And he found a lot of things that hadn't been taken care of the night before. It was very frustrating for him. And people just didn't seem to be fully engaged and committed. And they made mistakes. And they tried to correct some of those mistakes by automating some of the process and bringing in robots and things like that. But it didn't seem to help. They still had lots of problems. And it was so bad that they were months and months behind and on delivery, and they had to turn something around very quickly. And what we helped him to understand is that he was choosing to have all the accountability, all the control. He wasn't open. He wasn't transparent about the business. He wasn't building the capacity of people in the business, wasn't teaching them. They didn't have the understanding he had. And he didn't trust them. He said, they're not committed, so I can't really trust them. And I said, well, but why don't you trust them? What are they lacking? And he said, well, they don't have the understanding I have. Of course, I understand that. Okay, what else are they lacking? Well, there's certain knowledge they need. Okay, are there any skills they need? He said, no, they pretty much have the skill sets. It's just really about understanding. I said, so what's the obvious solution to that? Share the knowledge, share the information, build their understanding, right? Be more open and transparent, communicate more information. I said, what about progress? How do they know what the status of things is in the organization, or how you're doing as a team? He said, well, we have a lot of data in this folder, and it's buried like 10 levels deep in the hard drive. And I mean, you had to be pretty motivated to want to see that information. And I said, that doesn't work. That's not the kind of communication that inspires a team. You have to make that front and center so people can see how things are going and they can make in the moment corrections. And so they made some changes there. But we also brought people together. We educated, taught everybody the whole system, helped them to understand both context and connection that they worked in, and how they helped each other, and what some of the key handoffs were and what had to happen in those handoffs, and how to manage those more effectively, so that they made commitments to each other. And we helped them to learn to serve each other instead of compete against each other, creating an internal service culture in the interest of the end customer. And boy, that place turned around. I mean, they more than doubled productivity in about 3 months. Wow. And we're quickly catching up on the backlog, and did so well that the customer was thrilled with the progress and began to soften toward them, and actually ended up signing some new agreements with them to have them do more work for the customer. So the customer was pretty happy. And that's ultimately that's sort of the determinant of success. The marketplace decides if we have a right to compete in it. The marketplace sets the standards for everything. And we have to decide if we're going to make the changes that will enable us to be competitive and thrive in that marketplace. And that means we have to have people that are engaged, that are committed and passionate about coming to work and finding better ways to do things, and find better ways to serve the customer.
Absolutely. Boy, I love that example. It is so valuable. I mean, this whole conversation is so incredibly valuable because it's really not a difficult thing to do. And it doesn't feel like it takes a lot of investment, financial investment in doing it. It's more of a mindset shift.
That's exactly right. I always say productivity is free.
Yeah.
Productivity is free. It's a matter of how you lead, the system that you create, the conditions that you provide for people to work in. And that doesn't cost a dime. Yeah. It's really it's all about your stance about people, and then how you apply the effective principles of low control, high trust, to enable people to contribute at higher levels.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, Kevin, this is so great. I am so grateful to you for spending this time with me and explaining this and giving me examples, and just really fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Will you tell the listeners how they can find you, please?
Absolutely. I've simplified it for people. So you can go to the Ascent Management Consulting website by typing in the name of the company. It'll get you there. But if you just remember superchargemyteam.com. It's easy to spell. It's easy to remember. superchargemyteam.com. It'll take you right to the website. We have articles in there, leadership and team performance articles that will help you. You'll find tools. In fact, there's a form right there that you can fill out, get a free tool that helps you with connecting your team members and building that service culture that we talked about. It's really powerful, and I know you'll appreciate it if you get a chance to do it.
That's so great. I'll make sure that website's in the show notes as well. So
thank you.
Oh, thank you. And listeners, thank you. You are who we're doing this for.
Are you in transportation and logistics? Well, this podcast is for you. Every week, Truck and Hustle takes you on a journey to learn the ins and outs of the trillion-dollar transportation industry. Hear from real people and business owners just like you who are crushing it in their own transportation niches. We pull back the curtain, peek under the hood, and help you find out where the opportunities are so that you can take advantage and build your own million-dollar transportation empire. This is insider information that you can't find on Google. So if you're ready, let's take your transportation business to the next level. Join me, Ramel Watley, every Tuesday for a new and exciting episode of Truck and Hustle.